Hey you guys! Today we are talking about the cell cycle. The cell cycle is the life cycle of a cell, similar to how we have life cycles. We start off as babies, we grow up into adolescents, and then to adults, and then we get older, and then we pass away. But then we have children, and those children grow up, and they become adults, and then they have children, and so it's a cycle, and it goes on and on and on. And so it's a similar sort of cycle with cells. Cells are going to pass on their DNA to sort of offspring, to daughter cells. And so let's get started. You are made of 5 to 50 trillion cells, which is an enormous number. That is such a big number that we can't even really understand it. And so why does your body use so much energy? It uses lots of ATP to divide, to go through the process of dividing cells. So why aren't you just one big cell? Wouldn't that be easier? Wouldn't that make more sense? But no, instead we are between 5 and 50 trillion cells. And so why do we do that? Well, that is because, let me get the drawing tool here. If we want to stay small, we want our cells to stay small, and that is because we have, that is because we want to be able to get oxygen and sugar and lots of other molecules into every single part of our body or into every single cell at any moment. So at this point, you know that we have to make ATP all the time. So we are going through cell respiration all the time. And so we need oxygen to be able to, and glucose to be able to diffuse into our cell. And if we had a big cell, if we were made of one big cell or many big cells, it would take a long time for that oxygen to diffuse, let's say to the center or to any part of the cell. It would take a long time. However, if we have many, many, many small cells, then our blood reaches all of them, well then it only takes a very short amount of time for that oxygen and that glucose to reach the mitochondria, or for other molecules to get where they need to go. And so if we had cells the size of a basketball, it would take 100 years for oxygen to be able to diffuse to the center of that cell, and that's not fast enough. And so instead we are made up of many, many, many small cells, very small cells. And it's cool to think about because every cell is alive, and so you are made up of trillions of living things. You are one living thing made up of trillions of living things, which is really cool. Life is really interesting. Let me turn off the draw tool and go to the next page. So the cell cycle is the life cycle of the cell. It starts off as a small cell. So here we are at a small cell, the very beginning. And it's a young cell. And then it's going to get larger. And then it's going to replicate its DNA. And then it's going to grow larger again. And then it's going to divide into two young small cells. So that is essentially the life cycle of the cell. But let's look at what we call the cell cycle. And this is a picture of the cell cycle. And we're going to go through each of these steps. So the cell cycle starts out with this green phase right here. So let's picture what I mean by the beginning of the cell cycle. So we have one big cell that just divided into two daughter cells, meaning that we have two brand new baby cells. So let's look at this baby cell. This is the brand new cell that is starting its brand new baby cell life. And we're going to follow this cell through its life cycle. And so right here at the very beginning of G1, our cell is just beginning its life. And it is small, and so it's going to, in the G1 phase, so in the G1, it's going to grow larger. It's going to make new proteins that are going to do jobs in the cell, because proteins can act like little robots and do jobs in the cells for us. We're going to make new organelles, and then we're going to prepare for the next phase. The next phase is an important phase. This is S phase. So that is what G1 is we're getting bigger, we are preparing for S phase by making new proteins and making new organelles. So let's check out S phase. So during S phase, right here, the DNA, so S is synthesis. The word synthesis means to make or to create. And so during S phase or synthesis phase, the DNA is made. Our DNA is replicated. And so DNA, so we also call this DNA replication. So S phase is us replicating our DNA. Why do we need to replicate the DNA? Well, because later on the cell is going to split into two. And so we want to make sure we have an extra copy of all of the chromosomes or all of the DNA so that when the cell splits, they each get their own set of genetic material. And so once we get through the S phase, our cell is going to move into G2 phase. G2 phase, this is easy to remember because it's very similar to G1 phase. The cell is going to grow larger because pretty soon it's going to be dividing into two cells, so it has to get larger. And so what is it going to do? It's going to grow larger, but it's going to make more proteins to do jobs. It's going to make more organelles so that when it splits, it's going to have lots of proteins and organelles to divvy up. And it's going to prepare for M phase. This is M phase right here. You see this purple. So M phase has two parts. Mitosis right here, and we remember mitosis by PMAT, P-M-A-T, but you don't need to remember that now, so don't worry about that. So mitosis is the part of the cell cycle where our DNA is going to divide. Is going to separate. Our genetic material is going to separate. So over here in S phase, we made a copy of our genetic material. And here during mitosis, we're going to split that material up evenly so that half of it is on one side of the cell and the other half is on the other side of the cell. And then cytokinesis is going to be when the actual cell splits in half. So mitosis is when genetic material is split apart, and the cytokinesis is when the cell splits apart. And so both mitosis and cytokinesis are in something called the M phase, and we represent M phase with this purple. And if you can see here, we have red all around the G1, S, and G2. So that's going to take us over here. So all of G1, S, and G2, we call this the normal cell life. This is just a cell being a cell, hanging out, doing normal cell things. It is called interphase. This red part of the cell cycle here that incorporates G1, S, and G2, this is called interphase. And this is 90% of the cell cycle or the cell's life. And when we are in the interphase, or when we're in interphase, our DNA is going to be in a very relaxed, uncoiled form. So if you see here, the DNA is uncoiled. This is what our DNA is going to be like during G1, S, and G2, or all of interphase. Why is this? This is because our proteins need to be able to read the DNA so we can get instructions from it. So on other parts, during the M phase, our DNA is coiled up. Can you see how it coils? When it's coiled up like this, we can't read it, or our proteins can't read that DNA because it's all scrunched up. And so it is during M phase, it's going to be all coiled up, but during interphase, it's very important that our DNA is uncoiled so that we can read it, so our proteins can read it and get instructions from it. However, during M phase right here, it is very important that our DNA coils up because we have to, like we said before, we have to organize it. We have to split it in half. And we can't split it in half if it is all relaxed. So it is going to be in a very coiled up form, just like this. So it's going to coil, and then it's going to be able to be split apart in an organized way so that we can get exactly half. So think about like a bowl of spaghetti. If you had a bowl of spaghetti and all of the spaghetti, you had to divvy up all of the spaghetti exactly in half. A bowl of spaghetti. And we had to split all of that spaghetti in half in exactly the exact same amount. It'd be very difficult if all of those noodles were just uncoiled or just like laying down on a bowl of spaghetti. But if we could coil all of those up and make them smaller, we could keep track of them more easily. And that is exactly what happens with our DNA. It coils up, so it becomes smaller and more organized and easier to make sure that half of it gets to one side and the other half gets to the other side. So for you guys, that's the end of our notes for the cell cycle. But what I want you to do, you have a second assignment for today. I want you to draw out the cell cycle. So just like I've done here, what I want you to do is to grab a blank piece of paper and make sure that you have colors. And I want you to draw out the G1 phase, the S phase, the G2 phase. Mitosis right here, PMAT. The M phase right here. Cytokinesis. I didn't write cytokinesis. I will. Oh, yes, I did. It's right here, cytokinesis. And then interphase right here. So I want you guys to be sure that you are including all of those phases. And then I want you to create a description. This description for each phase should be at least one full sentence. So your sentence should at least one full sentence. You can use a couple of sentences. But it should be a description for G1 phase, a description for S phase, a description for G2 phase, etc., etc., etc. So when you're done, what I want you to do is to take a picture of your poster and upload it to PowerSchool. This is going to be worth 2 test points. When you are done, I think I said this already, upload it to PowerSchool. And if you have any questions, let me know. Have a great day.